Los Angeles, California. March 9th, 2019. Dissatisfied with mainstream scientific analysis of the DoD gimbal video, author and ancient astronaut theorist Mike Barra invited astrophysicist and aerospace engineer Dr. Travis Taylor to participate in an evaluation of the DoD's footage. They are also curious about the potential connection between the extraordinary movements of the UFO craft depicted and what Bob Lazar reported as the unique properties of what he is convinced was a captured extraterrestrial spacecraft, powered by element 115.
So here's the thing, though. If you assume the pilots are telling the truth, and if you assume the DoD is telling the truth,
right,
then don't you have a much stronger case for something unusual being present on these videos?
Yeah, so if you make all those assumptions, then you have this craft in this video that is performing outside of our abilities to manipulate physics with aerospace vehicles today.
Travis Taylor has worked on various programs for the United States Department of Defense and NASA for over 16 years.
I'm an optical scientist, an aerospace engineer, an astronomer, and a physicist, and I've worked in the aerospace and defense industry since I was 17 years old. And it's intriguing that a lot of people are saying that this gimbal video is something like what Bob Lazar claims to have worked on.
Mike Barra has written numerous books about U.S. and international space programs and has done extensive research into aviation technology.
The thing to me that's really interesting about this video is the fact that it actually encourages people to believe that these are alien spacecraft. Now, why would the government want to do that?
For Mike and Travis, the first step in analyzing the DoD footage is to determine whether it is genuine or could have been fabricated. To assist them in this effort, they have turned to a master of illusion.
Hey.
Hey.
Hollywood visual effects supervisor, Sam Edwards.
How you doing, Travis?
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, come on, after you.
This way?
Yeah, perfect. Here's the screening room.
Wow, this is great.
Yeah. Have a seat anywhere.
So, do you think that you and your team could go and recreate a video that looked authentic, like it came from, you know, the F-18 gun camera from, 2004 or whatever?
Listen, I'm in the visual effects business, right? And we don't ever say no.
Right.
Right? But, the joke is about the moon landing is, it must be real because Hollywood would never make something so boring.
Right.
Right?
Good point.
So there's no mediation at all to this image, right? It couldn't be more dull. It's just technically, this is in there and that's in there. There's nobody's artistic vision at all.
That to me is one of the best arguments right there for it. That makes perfect sense.
While there is no way to determine for certain that the video wasn't fabricated, based on what they are seeing, as well as the pilot's eyewitness corroboration, Mike, Travis, and Sam are convinced that the footage is genuine. If true, the implications are profound, as even some military personnel are of the opinion that the maneuvers displayed by the craft in the gimbal video resemble no known man-made technology.
So now the next question is the origin of that advanced propulsion.
Right.
Is it man-made advanced propulsion or is it extraterrestrial?
Let's try to reverse engineer what's there and understand what we're looking at. So yeah, it's air-to-air footage, and I thought that was kind of cool. I stabilized out some of the camera motion so we could kind of get a better feel for its trajectory.
Oh, okay.
Wow, yeah.
That's cool.
That tells us how much it's actually moving.
Which doesn't seem to me to be supersonic or anything like it.
If you look at that, it looks to me like there's structure in a couple of places. Now we're below it, right? Something right in here, and then something here. The interesting thing here is if you were looking at an SR-71 and it was below you and you're looking down at it, the wings would look sort of disc-shaped like that, and there would be a tail and there would be a nose structure, and these would be your wings.
If that's a wing, then what's going on now? Right? It's still traveling in the same direction.
Yeah.
It looks a lot like a top, doesn't it?
It doesn't really coincide with the aerodynamics of a regular airplane.
You look at fighter pilots, they can roll, they can pitch, they can crab, they can yaw. I mean, they can do all sorts of things to an airplane to make it look unusual.
I hear what you're saying, and we made a CG model, and I kind of hand-tracked it to sort of match its motion, so we could kind of get a feel for what some of its dimensions are.
Yeah, it's interesting. If it's looking straight on like your model there, your model matches to it pretty good.
Well, let me show you something else that catches my eye, gentlemen. What seems odd to me, this kind of light that follows behind the craft. There's no such thing as a light source that follows around behind an aircraft.
Right, because it's clearly there now that you pointed. I can't believe I didn't see it before.
Yeah.
So the system is in black hot mode. What that tells me, if black is hot, there's a cold region, a cold region around the vehicle. Think about it as a cold region around a propulsion system is odd. You typically are going to be, warm coming out of the exhaust or near your engine
Doesn't
or whatever.
that argue that it's not a conventional propulsion system?
July 20th, 1976. NASA's unmanned Viking 1 orbiter and lander touches down on the surface of Mars. 3 weeks later, it is joined by its companion, the Viking 2. For the first time ever, humanity has established a presence on another planet.
The Viking landers actually landed on Mars and took a sample, but they landed in one spot, and they stayed in one spot. We've since sent the Pathfinder Sojourner. For the first time, we have a system on Mars that if we see something shiny over there and we want to go check it out, we'll send the rover and get a very close look at it, take samples, get high-definition video from it, and that is a very good start for figuring out where people need to go when we get ready to send them there.
In 2012, the Curiosity rover landed on Mars's Gale crater. It was the most ambitious Mars mission flown by NASA to date.
Touchdown confirmed. Proceed on Mars.
One of its objectives was to gather data that will help scientists determine what is needed to make the planet more habitable for human exploration. In June 2018, scientist and aerospace engineer Dr. Travis Taylor traveled to Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. There, he met with NASA exploration mission scientist Dr. Elizabeth Rampey. Dr. Rampey analyzes data obtained by the Mars Curiosity rover, which 6 years into its mission is sending back some of its most extraordinary findings yet.
So there was very late-breaking news recently from the Curiosity rover, and some interesting information came out of the Sample Analysis at Mars, or SAM instrument.
Okay.
So SAM can measure gases in the atmosphere, and it can also measure gases that are evolved from samples. So basically, we drill a rock, deliver that powder to the instrument, and then that instrument heats up the sample and measures the gases that are coming off.
Whatever outgas is, it can tell you what that is, right?
Exactly. So a big piece of information from the atmosphere is that we've been tracking methane over the last few Martian years, and what we see is that there is a cycle to it where it spikes late summer, early autumn, and then dips again.
Wow.
Yeah, so the big question is why is that happening?
So that could possibly be due to an organic material, right? Or a biological source.
Exactly.
Meaning
so
life.
that's right. I know. So huge.
Wow.
It's not the only hypothesis out there.
Sure.
But there is the possibility that there is extant life on Mars that is creating this methane.
Wow. The fact that NASA has now released information that they've measured a cycle of methane that goes up in the summer and down in the winter, it sounds very similar to how biological processes create methane here on Earth. That could be evidence that there's life right now on Mars.
Life on Mars? According to NASA, such a profound notion is a distinct possibility. But although the space agency is still working to confirm their findings, ancient astronaut theorists remain confident of the outcome. They have maintained for decades that not only does the red planet contain life, but that it was once home to a highly advanced extraterrestrial civilization. And for their proof, they point to the existence of possible structures found on its surface.
There are lots of claims of photographs showing different features on the surface of Mars. These have come from the orbiters that are obviously taking pictures as they go round all the time. And some people would find different features and interpret them as geometric or rectilinear structures that suggest civilization.
You see everything you would expect to see if you went to someplace on planet Earth 50,000 years from now when the human race had been wiped out. They clearly are technological objects that have become fossilized.
While the notion that an ancient civilization once existed on Mars may sound far-fetched, NASA has continued to make discoveries that could reveal something even more incredible: that life on Earth actually originated on Mars.
So what is this? Tell me what this is.
Okay, so this is a Martian meteorite. So this is a rock that came from Mars.
How long ago?
The rock itself is about 180 million years old, so that's when it crystallized on Mars. And to give you some context, 180 million years ago, dinosaurs were roaming the Earth.
Right. Well, we know that this rock came from Mars. So if there was organic material on Mars 3.5 billion years ago, something could have caused that organic material to go from there to here, right?
Right, and what's interesting about, 3.5 billion years ago is that's when life was taking hold on Earth. So,
Right.
And Mars was once very Earth-like with rivers and lakes. So why not Mars? We've got all the building blocks for life on Mars, so why couldn't
So
it happen
it's
there?
very possible that we're descendants of Martians.
I'm not going to rule that out.
University of California at Irvine, April 2017. Aerospace engineer Travis Taylor has obtained a model of an aircraft whose design specifications are based solely on information gleaned from ancient Indian texts that are believed to have been formally set to writing in 500 BC. He is going to subject it to wind tunnel analysis to determine if it is a viable flying machine.
So, explain to me what we've set up here with that wind tunnel.
Okay, so this is our aerospace vehicle model. It's connected to this boom. The armature has a force gauge on it. We're gonna have airflow go past it at about 50 miles per hour or so. And then we're gonna measure forces against it to determine if it's gonna fly or not.
And so what are the signs that you're looking for in order to determine whether this is, in fact, aerodynamically sound?
Right, so we're gonna measure the normal force, and the normal force is up or down. If it starts to move up, then that'll be exciting because it's actually going to be rising, and that's how you get flight. When an airplane turns up and starts to move, it's because it's getting lift. The other thing is I don't want to see it going real bad side to side or real bad chatter up and down, because that would mean it's unstable.
All right, well, let's do it. Let's fire her up and see what happens.
Yeah, let's do it. The flow's coming up to speed.
Yeah.
While being subjected to 50-mile-an-hour winds, the craft exhibits a slight lift upwards, yet remains relatively steady.
No side-to-side wobble.
Okay.
Sensors record the measurements of various forces, as well as torque and pitch, to determine just how aerodynamic the body is.
It looks very stable.
All right. So let's look at the results.
So what happened during the test was the normal force, which is where we measure the lift, it was positive between 0.03 and 0.06 pounds of force. That means we were measuring lift. So our vehicle
in the wind tunnel experiment was showing positive lift like an aircraft would.
Did you expect these results from a shape that's like that?
Well, the shape looks like a lifting body to me, but you never know until you actually do the experiment. And we have experimental results now that says it is. So that's the exciting part.
And what do you say to anyone who questions the idea that this information has been taken from a text that's at least 1,800 years old?
The only thing you can say is we performed a good scientific experiment, and the results were that the shape made from those texts is a viable aerodynamic structure.
The aircraft model, created using details garnered from the ancient Indian texts, has proven to be flight-worthy. Is it possible that by studying the ancient Indian texts, we may be able to recreate advanced technology that existed thousands of years ago in India? Ancient astronaut theorists suggest that the texts may also contain details for advanced spacecraft. Hindu scholars point out that stories of space travel can be found throughout the pages of the ancient Sanskrit texts. There are even detailed accounts of humans entering flying crafts and being transported to other solar systems.
In the ancient text of Vishnu Purana, Lord Vishnu decides to take Dhruva, a human being, through an interstellar journey. We know this because it is specifically stated that Dhruva would be taken beyond planets like Mercury, Venus, and even beyond some other stars.
According to the text, he went past 7 planetary systems in a physical craft, and eventually he reached the solar system and planet of Vishnu Loka, the planet that Vishnu is said to have come from. So here we have the story of extraterrestrials taking a human to another solar system.
Although few details exist of the craft Dhruva was transported in, scholars have noted that highly specific descriptions of space vehicles can be found throughout the texts.
In the Samaranga Sutrahara text, there's a description of an engine that uses mercury, and the mercury swirls in a vortex, and it uses the heat from perhaps solar power to create some type of flying capability. My thought on this is it sounds a lot like an ion engine.
The concept for ion engines has actually been around for more than 100 years. Now, the way it works is xenon gas, which is like helium or neon, but heavier, is introduced into a chamber here, and it's ionized, which means it's given an electric charge. And once it has an electric charge, a voltage applied between this grid and one just behind it causes the xenon to shoot out of the engine. Well, the action of the xenon going out this direction causes a reaction that pushes the spacecraft in the other direction. And that's how the ion thruster propels the spacecraft.
You heat the ions up, and then you accelerate them at the back end of the spacecraft. It puts out a small amount of thrust, but for a very long time. And that's why ion engines are uniquely perfect for inner space travel.
In 2017, NASA's Advanced Exploration Systems Division asserted that identifying and extracting mineral resources in space, such as iron, tungsten, and titanium, would be essential for future space exploration and colonization.
The moon and the near-Earth objects that are not too far from Earth, they're loaded with minerals and raw materials. You can look at the moon, and where the Sea of Tranquility and the other seas, they have a different coloration because there's titanium oxide covering the surface. We know there's uranium there because we've detected radon gas. So there's all sorts of materials.
One of the companies I'm proud of having co-founded is a company called Planetary Resources, who's got a vision of going to near-Earth asteroids to mine those asteroids for fuel and ultimately precious metals, platinum group metals, or construction metals.
But as NASA makes plans to mine essential space minerals, Is it possible that other advanced civilizations came to Earth centuries ago for the same reason? As far as ancient astronaut theorists are concerned, the answer is yes. And they believe the evidence can be found in the Sumerian stories of the Anunnaki, written more than 5,000 years ago.
When we analyze the story of the Anunnaki's creation of humanity, some very interesting nuances come out that might lead into understanding what humans might face in their own eventual colonization of another planet.
When famed ancient astronaut theorist Zecharia Sitchin studied the Sumerian tablets in the 1970s, he not only reached the conclusion that the Anunnaki came to Earth to escape a dying planet, but also noted that while here, they used humans to mine for gold.
When we look at the creation stories of biblical tales, we understand that God created the earth in 7 days. It turns out that this consolidated version of 7 days can be translated to a much earlier story in Sumerian form called the Atrahasis, where there's actually 7 tablets of creation telling how the Anunnaki came to Earth and genetically engineered us in their image and in their likeness to mine the gold for them here on Earth.
Is it possible that when the ancient Sumerians wrote about giant beings coming down from the sky and digging for gold, they were in fact documenting a visitation by extraterrestrials who were mining for resources, just as NASA is planning to do in the not-too-distant future? June 2018. Scientist and aerospace engineer Dr. Travis Taylor is at Johnson Space Center's Building 9, the astronaut training facility. He is meeting with robotics engineer Lucien Junkin, who is eager to show him the latest in extraterrestrial transportation.
I see this is a rover. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, this is basically an off-roading RV for Moon and Mars.
And what is it that makes this so much better than, say, the lunar rover?
It can go out and explore. So the concept is if you have a habitat, you're gonna take 2 of these rovers and they'll go out for a week to 2 weeks and explore, come back, refuel, and then we'll be back out exploring.
Can we look inside or maybe go for a ride with it?
Let's go for a ride.
Oh, that'll be awesome.
Okay. Just put your foot there, jump on up. All right. Pilot's on, power's on, go to low gear.
Low gear.
Push forward on the stick.
The Planetary Analog Test Site, also known as the Rock Yard, is a multi-acre simulation of lunar and Martian terrain. It is here that the space exploration vehicle endures rigorous testing to determine its readiness for eventual off-Earth deployment.
Let's go through that crater first.
Okay. Just go up and over?
Yeah.
Can it handle that kind of a...
Yeah, if you put your foot right up there, that'll brace you in your seat. So like on a tank, you would typically feel it tip over.
Yeah.
So active suspension, each one of the wheel modules, it senses it.
Right, I see that. How about that? It's all right to ride across these?
Yeah, drive across anything.
Wow, this is amazing. When it sees a big rock like that, it just goes right over it?
Yeah, just go right over it. Let me show you something.
All right.
So you're gonna pick out a rock and we're gonna explore the rock in this.
Okay. Yeah, let's look at that rock right over there.
So look at this rock right here.
Uh-huh.
You can bow down to it. And then another cool feature, you twist this way.
Oh, and it crabs. Yeah, I got you, I got you.
See how we can just rotate all the way around?
That's amazing.
You're doing perfect. And then we're gonna shoot straight up that hill right there, the big hill.
Straight.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it is a rock climbing full.
Climb up a wall in this thing.
Yeah. And we want the vehicle to go places where they're like, this is my life support system.
Right.
I'm not going there.
Yeah, right.
But the vehicle would go.
We'll do it if they have to.
We'll do
right?
it if they have to.
November 1966. 3 years before the Apollo astronauts made it to the moon, the Orbiter 2 spacecraft situates itself in lunar orbit. It was designed to capture high-resolution images of the surface to assist with the selection of landing sites for the Apollo missions. One image in particular catches the eye of researchers as it shows what appear to be the shadows of several pointed spires.
On November 20th, 1966, the Lunar Orbiter 2, NASA's probe, photographs this area on the moon that was actually in the Sea of Tranquility only 300 kilometers away from where Apollo 11 ended up landing. And what's so bizarre is that this area has undeniable architecture that looks like what you would see from obelisks. There's 8 different spires, and scientists calculated that the largest of these spires would be an obelisk that is 15 stories tall. These do appear to be just like an Egyptian-style obelisk, but what the heck are they doing on the moon?
Of the multiple anomalies on the moon, I think the spires are some of the most fascinating ones because astronomers have calculated that these spires are very tall for them to be exclusively natural occurrences.
They have to be artificial, simply from the fact that the moon has been bombarded in kind of an incessant meteoric rain for 4.5 billion years. There is no way that anything bigger than a basketball can be standing straight up on the lunar surface.
The inference is that NASA would have known this, and that one of the reasons that they sent their mission there was so that the astronauts of the Apollo mission could gain more information about these artificial structures on the moon.
Telcom, go. Ginsey, go. Ecom, go. Surgeon, go.
Capcom, we're go for undocking.
Roger, Eagle, undock.
On Apollo 11, when the astronauts were descending to the lunar surface, they got this very strange computer alarm.
1202 alarm. 1202 alarm.
The famous 1202 computer alarm, and then basically nobody knew what it was. What it came out to was that the computer itself was overwhelmed with information. Because Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot, had turned on the radars on the lunar lander. It had 2 radars. It had a side-looking radar, and it had a docking radar. So in other words, you had one that pointed down and one that pointed to the side. Now, if there's nothing on the surface of the moon, if there are no artificial structures, if there are no spires sticking 10, 20 stories up into the sky, why would you turn on the side radar? There's no reason to, but Aldrin did it, and I think it's because he knew, and NASA knew, that there was some danger of running into these things.
Is it possible that NASA actually has knowledge of structures on the moon? In 1960, NASA officials commissioned a report from the Brookings Institute to weigh the implications of the discovery of evidence of extraterrestrial life. Due to the findings of the report, researchers believe it was determined before the moon missions to keep any extraterrestrial findings hidden from the public for fear of social unrest.
Since the time of the very first Apollo moon missions, researchers have pored over NASA and Russian photos of the moon, looking for structures. And they found some unusual things. You would think, in fact, that if extraterrestrials are on the moon, or were, that they would have built all kinds of structures. And we're able to see some of these, even though NASA scientists don't acknowledge them as genuine.
Huntsville, Alabama, July 24th, 1969. A crowd of thousands gathers in Courthouse Square to cheer on the triumphant return of Dr. Wernher von Braun. Just hours after Apollo 11's Columbia Command Module splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. The United States had achieved what many believed was impossible, putting a man on the moon.
The picture ran in newspapers around America the following day, celebrating the genius rocket engineer who was behind it all.
Von Braun is a titan, you know, he's one of the major figures of the last century, and he was way ahead of his time.
Von Braun adamantly believed that humanity's future was in space. He's the greatest voice we've had in the history of the space program.
Considered by NASA to be the father of rocket science, von Braun is credited with either inventing or helping to develop many of the most sophisticated aerial technologies that exist today, like the supersonic anti-aircraft missile, the ballistic missile, the first American satellite, and the first U.S. space vehicles, including the enormous Saturn V rocket that enabled man to reach the moon.
Without exaggeration, the Apollo program has been called the greatest achievement that mankind has ever accomplished. Without Wernher von Braun, we would not reach the moon. To date, the Saturn V is the most powerful rocket that we've ever built.
Von Braun's incredible engineering feats were matched only by his all-consuming crusade to send man into space. In the 1950s, when space travel seemed a fantasy, Wernher von Braun teamed up with Walt Disney to convince a skeptical public that putting man on the moon was not only possible, but that it would happen in their lifetimes. In these films, watched by an estimated 42 million people, von Braun boldly predicted not only how we would send men into space, but also the use of protective suits, lunar landing vehicles, orbiting space stations, and even manned trips to Mars.
If we were to start today on an organized and well-supported space program, I believe a practical passenger rocket could be built and tested within 10 years.
But who exactly was this engineering genius with such extraordinary visions for the future? Why did he believe so strongly that man could and should travel into space? And what did he expect to find when we got there? Wernher von Braun was born March 23, 1912, in a small town in eastern Prussia. The second of three sons, Werner grew up a child of wealth and privilege. But while he was born into an accomplished family, Werner's keen intellect and unusual passions stood out. His father once said, "I don't know where his talent comes from," and stated on more than one occasion that he considered his son a mystery.
Wernher von Braun was multi-talented. Both sides of his brain were working. He could think about technical things and imagine rocketry and space travel, but he was an accomplished musician. And these traits manifested very early. I think his parents knew by the time he was 4 or 5 that he was very special. His mother gave him a telescope when he was young, and he looked at the moon and said, "I want to go there. I want to build the machine that will go to the moon." And of course he did half a century later.
Tranquility Base, Houston. Guidance recommendation is pings, and you're cleared for takeoff.
July 21st, 1969. Approximately 21 and a half hours after landing on the moon, the lunar module Eagle lifts off to rejoin the command module Columbia and begin the return to Earth. The astronauts take with them 47.5 pounds of lunar surface material, and they leave some items behind as well, like scientific instruments, an American flag, and a small plaque commemorating the Apollo 11 mission. But perhaps most curious of the items left on the moon was a small bag containing a gold replica of an olive branch and a silicon disc with recorded messages of peace and goodwill from 73 world leaders. Why were these symbolic messages sent up into space? Some ancient astronaut theorists suggest that the mastermind behind the Apollo program, Wernher von Braun, was expecting to find more on the moon than NASA wanted the public to know.
Wernher von Braun famously said that the next world war will be the war against the ETs. His remarks were hugely controversial. Some people have said that he was simply saying there can't be another world war now that we've got atomic weapons. Other people have speculated that he knew something and he was hinting at some terrible truth.
Another story relates that von Braun claimed that we had help from them to get us into space. If anybody knew about the extraterrestrials, it would have been a guy like Wernher von Braun.
Some ancient astronaut theorists propose that not only did alien beings have a hand in man reaching the moon, but that once there, we discovered further evidence that we are not alone. And they claim the strongest proof can be found by examining our last manned trip to the moon, the Apollo 17 mission in 1972.
We definitely weren't told everything, and there's monkey business played with the moon landings, of course, as far as what we know about them.
Apollo 17 was in fact a technology salvaging mission.
Yeah, looks like there's been a geologist here before us.
Some of it has to do with the actual landing site itself. There were several mountains in the area that don't really look like mountains. One of them is very hexagonal looking, and they bear a striking resemblance to actual artificial structures. The astronauts went directly for this hexagonal mountain. They parked on the hill above it, and then they got out of the lunar rover. What's interesting is that for the next 20 or 30 minutes, NASA has control of the camera on the rover, and they point it at everything except what the astronauts are doing. They had plenty of time to rappel down inside of this V-shaped depression.
Okay, let's go on back. I am.
It's really interesting that we don't see any of the astronauts at all until they come back to the lunar rover.
Here we go.
There's no question that the mystery would be what they were looking for, what they found. Could it possibly have been ancient alien technology?
Ancient astronaut theorists suggest that even more compelling than the hexagonal formation is what appears at another spot that was filmed: the Shorty Crater.
There is orange soil. Well, don't move it till I see it. It's all over. Orange!
In Shorty Crater, you can see orange soil that was discovered at the landing site, and the reason the soil was orange was because it had a great deal of oxygen in it, which was kind of a surprise. But the biggest surprise is if you actually look in the crater, what you see are objects that at first might to the naked eye appear to be rocks, but in fact, as you study it with an engineer's eye, what you see is mechanisms. And right in the middle of it, there's a very interesting object that as you zoom up on it, it begins to look more and more like a human head.
Mike Barra and fellow researcher Richard Hoagland obtained early generation negatives from Shorty Crater, and upon enhancing the colors present in the film, found that the object appears metallic.
The most intriguing thing is that on the upper part of the mouth, there was a bright, distinct red stripe painted across it, and it glowed and shone as if it were metallic. You then come to the realization that what you're probably looking at is the head of a humanoid-appearing robot, the leftovers of an explosion that damaged and destroyed a bunch of mechanical stuff.
Reaching the moon was such an unbelievable feat that even to this day, many people are convinced the entire event was actually staged in a Hollywood studio. But ancient astronaut theorists suggest not only did we land on the moon, but what we found there was more incredible than we know.
During the 1969 Apollo moon mission, after the landing, there was a very strange 2-minute gap in radio transmissions. And what happened during those 2 minutes has been subject to a lot of controversy.
Neil, this is Houston, radio check, over. Columbia, this is Houston, over. Small white object.
According to scientist and NASA researcher Otto Bender, various ham radio operators were able to intercept secret communications with mission control that were not made public.
The astronauts apparently talked about seeing extraterrestrial objects on the moon, including flying saucers parked along the edge of a crater within their view.
Now, the truth of it is that each of the astronauts had a separate medical channel. That channel was not public, and it could have been very easily used to communicate information that you didn't want to be heard over the general public transmissions. What's really interesting about that story, though, is the fact that within 30 minutes of the landing on the moon, that story was circulating around NASA that, hey, guess what? They saw something on the rim of a crater, they were all upset, they didn't know what to do, they didn't know if they should go out.
It is interesting when you watch the feed of when they came back from the moon. And they're not sitting there jumping up and down for joy and saying, I had the most incredible experience in my life, I was on the moon. They're not saying that. They look very sullen, very depressed. They're looking down. They almost look like they want to vomit. That's how disturbed they look. Could they have seen something there that they didn't want to tell the public because of the implications?
I believe that what this country set out to do was something that was going to be done sooner or later.
We find for the first time that man has the flexibility or the option of either walking this planet or some other planet.
It's a beginning of a new age.
After Apollo 11, NASA would send 6 more manned missions to the moon, culminating with Apollo 17 in 1972.
One of the most interesting questions with regard to our interaction with the moon is why we have never gone back there again since the Apollo missions. And what else is very telling is that although the USSR at the time was getting to be quite able to send its own astronauts to the moon, it never seems to have done so. Could it be that there were agencies associated with the moon, aliens or other beings who had warned humanity to stay away for some reason?
Cusco, Peru. Nestled in a high river valley of the Andes Mountains, among peaks towering over 20,000 feet. This once great city served as the capital of the Inca Empire from the 13th to 16th centuries AD. In 1533, Spanish conquistadors arrived in Cusco and were astonished by the incredible stonework found at a site just north of the city called Sacsayhuaman.
Above the city of Cusco, we find the megalithic site and huge ceremonial Inca complex called Sacsayhuaman. Its most prominent feature is a zigzag wall of 3 levels. Some of the stones there weigh as much as 125 tons and were moved from the quarry at least 3 miles away.
Sacsayhuaman is one of the most beautiful ancient structures you will ever see in your life. There are massive, gigantic megalithic blocks, and you find the most amazing of masonry style where you can't even fit a dollar bill in between the fittings of any of the blocks.
Sacsayhuaman served both as a fortress and a ceremonial center. A circular structure that lies within the megalithic walls, called Mayuk Marca, was the base of a tower where the Inca worshipped the sun god Inti. However, many experts suggest that while the Incas certainly utilized this megalithic structure, they were not the ones to build it.
Standard belief is that the Inca constructed Sacsayhuaman less than 1,000 years ago. But some of the earliest Spanish chronicles, it is said that the Spanish were completely astounded by seeing this site, and they asked the local Inca, "Did you build it?" And the Inca replied, no, this was here when we arrived 500 years ago.
Many experts believe Sacsayhuaman predates the Inca by thousands of years, and that the Inca built on top of what came before.
The Inca were a Bronze Age civilization, and the stones at Sacsayhuaman are metamorphosed limestone, which is much harder than bronze, and could not be cut or shaped using bronze tools. Inca built on top because you can tell a major difference between megalithic construction, where the stones fit perfectly together, and the Inca, which is stones piled on top of stones with mortar as filler.
But if Sacsayhuaman really does predate the Inca, as the Inca themselves claimed, how could an even earlier civilization have possessed far superior technology?
The ancient Inca talk about celestial beings who descended from the sky a long time ago and imparted the first knowledge of anything toward people of Earth. The ancient astronaut theory suggests it was human beings who built Sacsayhuaman, but under the tutelage of the extraterrestrials.
Thebes, Egypt, 1290 BC. The elderly King Ramses I passes away after a reign of just 16 months, and his son Seti is announced as the new pharaoh. Egypt is in a period of chaos, and Pharaoh Seti believes the only way to save it is to restore the power of the old gods.
Pharaoh Seti is one of the most important characters in Egyptian history. And one of Seti's most important objectives as pharaoh was to bring back the old gods, to bring back the power of the old gods, the understanding of the importance of Osiris.
One of the things that he does as part of that restoration of the old ways to the multiple gods is go to Abydos, builds the Temple of Bear with lots of different side temples that are there to worship these different gods and goddesses.
In Abydos, Seti built one of the most magnificent temples in all of Egypt, containing 7 chapels dedicated to different gods. But when Seti arrived in Abydos in 1951, the great temple she claimed to have known in her past life was all but gone.
There was around 2,500 pieces of the temple scattered everywhere, and Ghazuli and others had no idea how to fit these pieces back together. But Seti, maintaining that she had this past life memory, could tell them, oh, this piece would go here, this piece would go there, I remember it looking like this.
This was an incredibly daunting task, but she started each day with unbridled passion and enthusiasm, and Abydos was reconstructed according to Seti's instructions.
She solves the amazing jigsaw puzzle of putting together these 2,500 pieces and restoring the Temple of Abydos in 2.5 years, which is absolutely impossible without her extraordinary understanding of the temple. It would have taken 20 years for anybody else to do the work that she did in 2.5 years.
According to Seti, restoring the temple at Abydos was about much more than just resurrecting the past. To her closest friends, she confided that this ancient structure served an extraordinary purpose.
Seti would actually state that the Temple of Abydos served as a stargate of sorts, a place where you were able to jump in and out of time and space.
A stargate? Could the Temple of Abydos have acted as a portal to other points in the universe? According to ancient astronaut theorists, a feature inside the temple supports this sensational claim. They point to a bell-shaped object painted on a chapel wall that some refer to as the Osiris device.
When we look at this symbol through modern eyes, it's highly technological. To the eyes of a physicist or an engineer, it looks like a Tesla coil. And you wonder, what could an image that resembles a Tesla coil be doing on the walls of a temple that's 3,500 years old?
The Tesla coil was designed in the late 1800s by inventor Nikola Tesla as a way to wirelessly transmit electricity. But ancient astronaut theorists suggest there is a far more advanced technology depicted on the opposite wall of the chapel.
On the opposite wall, we see the same device, but now it's attached to what is called the Neshemet barge of Osiris, his resurrection barge. And what's so amazing about this barge is that its shape is virtually identical to the way modern science portrays a wormhole or an Einstein-Rosen bridge.
The power of Abydos is something that we're still only beginning to understand. It's such a profoundly mysterious place.
"400 miles south of El Paso, Texas, in northern Mexico, stretches a remote and rugged section of high desert. This area, near the town of Ceballos, is referred to by the locals as the Zona del Silencio, or the Zone of Silence. It's an epicenter for some of the strangest phenomena ever experienced on Earth.
Nothing works there. If you go there with your cell phone, the cell phone stops. If you go with a radio, it stops. If you go there with a compass, the needle just keeps spinning.
It's completely bizarre. There's strange rocks everywhere. You have strange mutated animals living in the desert in this area. You feel a strange tingling when you're there.
The Zone of Silence was first identified in the 1930s by Francisco Sarabia, a Mexican pilot who claimed that his radio had mysteriously failed to function while flying over the area.
They call it Mexico's Bermuda Triangle. It's located practically on the same parallel, 28th and 26th parallel, and as a result of that, it goes and connects with the Egyptian pyramids. So all around that whole sector, there seems to be some connection between the anomalies that are occurring through these different parts of the world.
As a scientist, you're trained to be skeptical, or maybe you were born that way, but we really don't believe anything. You know, nothing is proven until you actually have evidence. But I can say that Earth's magnetic field does vary across the surface by up to a few %.
One of the strangest cases involving the Zone of Silence took place on July 11th, 1970, when the U.S. Air Force launched an Athena missile from its military facility in Green River, Utah. The missile was programmed to land 700 miles away at the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. But for some unexplained reason, the Athena missile flew hundreds of miles past the White Sands Range towards the Zone of Silence.
Not only did it go off course, it way overshot, as if it had been picked up or yanked or dragged or pulled into it. There was a NASA spokesman who even said it was weird. It was like the thing just got pulled into this area, and it ended up crashing there and breaking up into bits.
But some claim this missile is not the only thing that's been mysteriously pulled into the Zone of Silence. Ancient alien theorists believe an unusually large number of meteorites have crashed here.
The evidence seems to be indicating that the Zone of Silence is some powerful energy vortex area that's literally sucking meteorites and other space debris right into this small area of northern Mexico.
There's a high level of magnetism in the area. That's been proven by science. We know there's a magnetic signature to the entire area. Is it strong enough to attract large objects like meteorites? I think we need more research, but I don't think that research is being done right now.
Starting 3,000 years ago, the Anasazi culture inhabited the region to the north, in today's American Southwest. Anasazi means ancient ones. and they paid great attention to the stars. Scientists have determined that in 1054 AD, a supernova explosion was visible from Earth. Many believe the first known drawing of this event was found inside an Anasazi cave dwelling. South of the Zone of Silence, other cultures, including the Maya, also reportedly possessed a surprisingly detailed knowledge of similar celestial events. Is it possible that both of these cultures were somehow exchanging information?
They're separated by thousands of miles, but both the Anasazi of the north and the Mesoamericans of the south found the Zone of Silence and used it as a meeting place between their two cultures. You can imagine if you studied the stars at night and plotted the constellations, obviously one of the things you're going to see are these meteorites streaking across the sky. If your answers come from the sky, you probably would follow those streaking meteorites and find out where they ended up. And the theory is that they may have found what they were looking for in the Zone of Silence.
In the United States, there are over 6,000 UFO sightings reported every year, more than any other country in the world. But why? Is there an explanation for such a high number of UFO sightings? Could aliens have a special interest in America? According to ancient astronaut theorists, not only are aliens watching over North America today, but in fact, they have been visiting us for hundreds and possibly even thousands of years. And they claim the evidence can be found in the strange sites, structures, and monuments that lie in every corner of the continent.
America is really a very mysterious place with all kinds of strange legends. So trying to put all of these things together in context shows us that we're living in a very unusual continent full of magic and mystery.
Serpent Mound in Adams County, Ohio. The Kivas at Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. Bighorn Medicine Wheel in Wyoming. Many Native American tribes say that at these ancient sites and countless others, entities that they call star beings came down from the sky to teach their ancestors.
To the Zuni people and other tribes, there's a spiritual connection with the star beings. They're the ones that actually rule the universe or the world that we're on. If you look at the petroglyphs, there's a lot of references to those type of entities.
According to tribes like the Zuni and Hopi, stories of these otherworldly visitations exist not only in the oral traditions passed down from their ancestors, but also in petroglyphs carved into rock all across America. On the Zuni Pueblo in New Mexico, there are literally thousands of ancient carvings that most outsiders have never laid eyes on. And the Zuni claim that some of these petroglyphs depict visitations from star beings.
There is definitely evidence that aliens visited North America in a distant past, and there are petroglyphs throughout this part of the country carved by ancient Americans that depict just that. What can you tell me about this petroglyph right here?
You know, if you can see on top of it where maybe a head would be, it's kind of eroded off. But on the next part of it, there's 4 compartments, look like extension of something sticking out.
Yeah, almost like legs.
It could be something that they saw in the air.
Isn't there a legend that beings visited on top of this mountain?
Oh, yes, on all of the mesas.
In conjunction with all the stories of star people descending from the sky in fiery shields and things like this, when I see a pattern like that, I always think, what if this is something that they saw and then they carved onto a rock?
And a lot of these are sacred drawings. They're just not graffiti like a lot of people say they are.
No, never.
There was no such thing as that in those days. Look at that triangle up there.
And you've got the dots around it that have been carved into the rock. They remind me like stars.
Could the ancient people in this part of America really have been trying to depict encounters with alien spacecraft?
There are legends and myths all around the world that can be interpreted as having been visits by extraterrestrials, and many think that such stories don't exist here in the United States. But the fact is that there are things in this country that nobody's even dreamed of.
According to ancient astronaut theorists, there is evidence that otherworldly beings were not only witnessed by Native Americans, but also by the European colonists. And curiously, one of the earliest UFO sightings reported in the colonies occurred in an area that the local Wampanoag Nation claimed was a point of contact with star beings. The Hockomock Swamp, southeastern Massachusetts. Located 25 miles south of Boston, in and around the suburban town of Bridgewater, this vast wetland is infamous for being the heart of the Bridgewater Triangle. According to Native American legends, this 200 square mile region has been a hotbed of UFO sightings dating back to before Columbus arrived in the New World.
Within the Bridgewater Triangle, a huge amount of interesting paranormal activity has been reported, including very high numbers of UFO sightings. Some people speculate that maybe it's the presence of the Hockomock Swamp.
The very name Hockomock means place where evil spirits dwell. European colonists settled this area in the 17th century, but the stories of paranormal activity here go back long before that time. Time and time again, we see stories about beings that live in the sky, flying canoes, what are apparently spaceships that land, people that get out and interact with the Native Americans.
On May 10th, 1760, in this same area where Native Americans say star beings interacted with humans, European colonists reported seeing mysterious lights in the sky. The account appeared in a publication that was read throughout the English-speaking world, called the Gentleman's Magazine.
According to historical records, at 10 a.m., a sphere of fire appeared that emitted a light bright enough to cast a shadow in bright sunlight. And this object was reported to be seen not only in Bridgewater, but also in Roxbury, over 30 miles away. Now that's interesting to me because the fact that people in two different cities reported seeing the same thing at the same time, to me says that they really saw something.
It was seen by a huge number of people, and one observer remarked that the sound that this giant ball of light made was heard more in the middle of its travel than at the beginning, which I think is a very interesting detail that does correlate to some extent with more modern UFO reports.
The Bridgewater sighting of 1760 is just one of many incredible events that took place in colonial America. It was mysterious, it was the frontier. Something was up there in the sky way before any powered flight had been invented by modern humanity.